Hello, buddy. Welcome back to Tin Man's Core Channel. I'm your host, Jeffrey Tin Man Taylor, and today I'll be reacting to yet some more scary story reactions. And the first video that I'll be watching is 4 disturbing, allegedly true paranormal stories from the Midnight Nightmare channel. So without further ado, I'm going to turn these lights off, move the camera up here for you guys, and let's get this reaction on the road and in the bag, shall we? Okay, here we go.
I had always loved driving at night. There was something calming about the empty roads and the cool, crispy air rushing in through the slightly open window.
Right.
It was a time for solitude and reflection, away from the hustle and bustle of the day. This particular night, however, would shatter my love for nocturnal drives forever.
Before he continues with the story, he's right about driving at night because, one, you barely see any other traffic on the roads late into the dark hours like this, and two, with that cool breeze coming in your windows, really keeps you awake and feel at ease, basically. But let's continue with the story, see what happens next.
It was a typical Friday night. I had just finished a long week at work and decided to take a drive to clear my head. The highway stretched out before me, a seemingly endless ribbon of asphalt cutting through the darkness. The only light came from my headlights, illuminating the road ahead and the occasional reflective road signs. I had driven this route many times before, a lonely stretch of highway that led to a small town where I used to spend my summers. As I drove, I noticed a figure up ahead, on the side of the road. At first, I thought it might be an animal, but as I got closer, I realized it was a person, a hitchhiker, standing at the edge of the highway, their thumb out. It was unusual to see someone out here, especially this late at night.
I mean, hey, sometimes hitchhikers don't stop at a cheap hotel for the night. They just want to keep on going until they get to the destination that they're traveling to. But yeah, that was spooked me to bits, seeing somebody out that late hitchhiking. After hearing all those hitchhiking stories, you gotta make sure that person ain't insane.
And my curiosity got the better of me. I slowed down and pulled over to the side of the road. The hitchhiker was a young woman, probably in her mid-20s. She was dressed in a simple, old-fashioned dress that looked out of place in the modern era. Her hair was long and dark, falling over her shoulders in loose waves.
Hey, you don't judge people by what they're wearing. You never know, they might be into wearing old clothes like that and then keeping their hair long. But I got a feeling she ain't no modern day person. She's a ghost of a female back from the olden times, but she's able to appear solid like a normal human being.
As she approached the car, I could see that she was shivering, her breath visible in the cold night air. "Need a ride?" I asked, trying to sound casual, despite the unease that was beginning to creep into my mind. "Yes, please," she replied, her voice soft and tremulous. "Thank you so much." She climbed into the passenger seat, and I resumed driving. The silence in the car was thick and oppressive, broken only by the low hum of the engine. I tried to make small talk, asking her where she was headed and why she was out here alone, but her answers were vague and non-committal. She told me her name was Emily, and that she needed to get to a town a few miles down the road. As we drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Emily sat very still, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes staring straight ahead. There was an unsettling air of calm about her, as if she was detached from the world around her.
Yeah, like she was just happy to get out of the rain. But hopefully you should not have nothing to worry about with her. I don't know. Let's just see what happens next.
I glanced at her occasionally, trying to gauge her mood, but her expression remained blank and unreadable. The drive seemed to stretch forever. The dark highway, once a source of peace and solitude, now felt like a suffocating tunnel with no end in sight. I turned on the radio to fill the silence. but the static only added to the sense of unease. I quickly turned it off and focused on the road, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. We were about halfway to our destination when things started to get really strange. Emily began to fidget, her movements jerky and unnatural. She started muttering under her breath, her words too low for me to make out. I asked her if she was okay, but she didn't respond. Instead, she turned to look at me, her eyes wide and filled with a strange, haunting sadness. "He's coming," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the engine. "Who's coming?" I asked, my heart racing. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned her gaze back to the road, her body tense and rigid. I looked around, but there was nothing unusual outside, just the empty highway and the darkness pressing in from all sides. I tried to tell myself that she was just a scared girl, maybe running from something or someone, but the fear in her eyes were contagious.
I mean, if I heard her say he's coming, I would have thought that she was running away from someone. But that'd be kind of creepy seeing her just jumping around in her seat and staring back at you with a wide open eyed look.
And I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. As we neared the town, Emily's behavior became more erratic. She started rocking back and forth in her seat, her muttering growing louder and more frantic. I could make out bits and pieces of what she was saying, words like help, run, and danger. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to pull over and let her out, but I couldn't just leave her out here, alone, in the middle of nowhere. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw him, a dark figure standing by the side of the road, barely visible in the dim light. He was tall and thin, his face obscured by shadows. As we drove past, his head turned to follow the car, and I felt his gaze like a physical weight pressing down on me. I glanced at Emily, but she was staring straight ahead, her eyes wide with terror. "He's here," she said, her voice trembling. "He's found me." I floored the gas pedal, desperate to put as much distance between us and that figure as possible. The car sped down the highway, the engine roaring in protest. Emily's muttering grew louder, her words a jumbled mass of fear and desperation. I tried to keep my focus on the road, but my mind was racing with questions. Who was this man? Why was he after her? And why did I feel like we were being watched? We reached the town in record time. The streets were empty, the buildings dark and silent. I pulled into a gas station parking lot and turned to Emily, ready to demand answers. But when I looked at the passenger seat, she was gone. The door was still closed, the seat belt fastened, but she had vanished without a trace. I sat there, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to make sense of what had just happened.
Oh man, that'd be spooky to see for sure. You pull up at a gas station and she's not sitting there no more and you didn't hear the door open. Very spooky and creepy. But I guarantee you that was the evil spirit of maybe a boyfriend that was abusive and they both died and he keeps on chasing her in the afterlife. I don't know. That's very strange.
I got out of the car and looked around, but there was no sign of her. It was as if she had never been dead at all. I checked the back seat, the trunk, even under the car, but there was no trace of her. I got back in the car, my mind reeling. I drove around the town, hoping to spot her or found some clue as to what had happened, but the streets remained empty. Eventually, I gave up and headed back to the highway, my thoughts a chaotic jumble of fear and confusion. As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow, every dark corner seemed to hide a lurking presence. The figure we had seen on the road haunted my thoughts, his faceless silhouette etched into my memory. I kept glancing in the rear-view mirror, half expecting to see him standing there, watching me with those unseen eyes. I never saw Emily again. I never found out who she was running from or why she had disappeared so suddenly. But the memory of that night has stayed with me, a chilling reminder of the unknown dangers that lurk into the darkness. I no longer take late night drives, and I avoid that stretch of highway whenever possible. Some mysteries are best left unsolved. and some roads are better left untraveled.
Amen to that. I wouldn't be traveling back on that road if I had an experience like that, too. Because it'll almost be like a time loop, seeing her appear, accept a ride, and then when you stop somewhere, she's gone. My brain will be jumping all over the place. But anyway, let's continue with story number 2.
I've always loved hiking. There's something about the fresh air, the rustling leaves, and the solitude that brings me peace. So when my friend Mark suggested we spend the weekend hiking and camping in a remote forest near a small village, I eagerly agreed. Little did I know that this trip would lead us into a terrifying encounter that still haunts me to this day.
Going into the woods for a little hiking adventure sounds fun, but if you go too deep in the woods, you might stumble across something beyond this world. Either in the paranormal cryptid fields, which will be scary by itself, even if you're not surrounded by a lot of woods. But let's continue.
The forest was in a remote area, far from the bustling city life. The locals spoke of strange occurrences in the forest, tales of whispers in the wind and sightings of shadowy figures. But Mark and I dismissed them as mere folklore, excited for our adventure. We packed our gear and drove to the edge of the forest, arriving just as the sun was setting. The towering trees cast long shadows, and the forest seemed to swallow the last rays of daylight. We parked the car, shouldered our backpacks, and began our hike into the dense woods. The first few hours were uneventful. We chatted and laughed, enjoying the tranquility of the forest. The path was well trodden, and the only sounds were the crunch of leaves underfoot and the distant call of birds. As night fell, we found a clearing by a small stream and set up our campsite. After pitching the tent and starting a fire, we sat down to cook dinner. The warmth of the fire and the aroma of grilled sausages filled the air, creating a cozy atmosphere. We talked about our plans for the next day, planning to explore deeper in the forest and maybe find some hidden trails.
Yeah, you never know what type of trails you will find deep in the woods that are cut off from normal trail access. Might lead you deep into the woods, or you might find an old abandoned cabin, shed. You just never know what you'll find in the woods nowadays.
As we ate, the wind picked up, and the trees around us began to sway and creak. The fire flickered, casting eerie shadows on the surrounding trees. Suddenly, we heard a faint whisper, barely audible over the cracking fire and rustling leaves. "Did you hear that?" Mark asked, his brow furrowed. "Hear what?" I replied, straining to listen. "It sounded like someone whispering," he said, looking around nervously. "It's probably just the wind," I said, trying to sound reassuring, but a chill ran down my spine, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. We finished our dinner in silence, the whispering growing louder and more persistent. It seemed to come from all directions, carried by the wind. The firelight created dancing shadows that played tricks on our eyes, making the forest seem alive. "Maybe we should turn in for the night," Mark suggested, his voice trembling slightly. "Yeah, that's a good idea," I agreed, eager to escape the unsettling atmosphere. We doused the fire and crawled in our tent, zipping it up tightly. The whispers continued outside, a constant murmur that made it hard to sleep. I lay there, listening to the sounds of the forest, my heart pounding in my chest. Just as I was about to drift off, I heard a distinct voice, clear and close, as if someone was right outside the tent. "Help me," it whispered, sending a jolt of fear through my body.
Oh, believe me, that would jolt some fear and adrenaline in my body too. Because you would think that you're in your tent, about ready to go to sleep peacefully, and you hear somebody say, "Help me." I'll be like, okay, does somebody actually need help? And like they're running away from somebody? Or someone playing a trick to get us out of the tent? I don't know, but that's very disturbing to hear.
I sat up, my heart racing. "Mark, did you hear that?" He was already awake, his eyes wide with fear. Yeah, I heard it. What the hell was that? I don't know, but it sounds like someone needs help, I said, reaching for the flashlight. Are you crazy? We can't go out there, Mark said, grabbing my arm. We can't just ignore it, I insisted, shaking off his grip and unzipping the tent. I stepped out into the cold night, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The forest was eerily silent, the whispering having stopped abruptly. I scanned the area, but there was no sign of anyone. Hello? I called out, my voice echoing in the stillness. Is anyone there? There was no response, just the sound of the wind rustling the leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. I felt a growing sense of dread, as if the forest itself was watching us.
That would be creepy, but I would have not said hello because if it was a real person out there, they would know that you're awake and probably start charging at you. But I guarantee you, since this is probably a ghost of somebody, they're going to stay quiet and not say another word. But if they do, and you don't see nobody, I'll be calling quits on the camping trip right now.
Let's go back inside, Mark pleaded, his voice shaking. This is freaking me out. I nodded, and we retreated into the tent, zipping it up tightly. We lay there in the darkness, listening to the silence, our fear growing with each passing minute. Hours passed, and just as I began to think we were safe, the whispers returned. This time they were louder, more instant, and seemed to come from right outside the tent. Help me, a voice repeated, sending shivers down my spine. Who are you? I shouted, my voice trembling. There was no response, just the relentless whispering. Mark and I huddled together, too scared to move, our hearts pounding in unison. Suddenly, the tent shook violently, as if something or someone was trying to get in. We screamed, clutching each other in terror. The shaking stopped as abruptly as it had started, leaving us in a stunned silence. What the hell is happening? Mark whispered, his voice barely audible. I don't know, but we need to get out of here, I replied, my mind racing. We quickly packed our gear, our hands shaking with fear. As we stepped out of the tent, the forest seemed even darker and more menacing. The whispering had stopped, but the sense of being watched was overwhelming. We started walking back towards to the car, our flashlights barely illuminating the path. Every rustle of leaves and snap of wings made us jump, our nerves on edge. The forest seemed to close in around us, trees looming like silent sentinels. As we neared the edge of the forest, we saw a figure standing in our path. It was a man, dressed in old clothes, his face hidden in shadow. Who are you? I called out, my voice trembling. The man didn't respond. He just stood there, watching us with an eerie stillness. Let's go around him, Mark whispered, pulling me to the side. We tried to skirt around the figure, but no matter which way we went, he was always in our path. It was as if he was a shadow, impossible to escape. Run, I shouted, and we bolted, our footsteps echoing in the silence. We reached the car and fumbled with the keys, our hands shaking. Finally, we managed to unlock the doors and jumped inside, slamming them shut.
I'm glad you got back to your car because I would have been doing the same thing if I saw someone walking in the woods look like they're wearing old raggy clothes, but then when you try to run past them, they show up on the other trail. Almost like they're trying to not make you leave. But thankfully they got to their car safe and sound.
I started the engine, and we sped away, leaving the forest behind. We didn't stop driving until we were miles away, the fear still gripping us. That forest became a place of nightmares, and I vowed never to return. I can't shake the feeling that something followed us in that forest, something dark and malevolent. The whispering still haunts my dreams, a constant reminder of the terror we experienced that night. The forest may seem like a place of beauty and tranquility, but beneath its surface lies a darkness that is best left undisturbed.
I agree with that. Whatever's in that forest needs to be left alone. Definitely one of the creepiest stories I ever heard about in the woods with a ghost.
I've always had a fascination with abandoned places. There's something hauntingly beautiful about the decay, the stories left behind, and the silent echoes of lives once lived. So, when my friends and I decided to explore the old asylum on the outskirts of town, I was thrilled. Little did I know that this adventure would turn into a nightmare that would haunt me forever. The asylum had been abandoned for decades. It loomed on a hill, its broken windows and crumbling facade giving it an ominous appearance.
That's another thing that I can agree with. Even though abandoned buildings look creepy, you always wonder who used to live in them and why did it go under. But seeing buildings kind of decayed looking like this one makes it a little bit more gothic. Kind of reminds me of something you'll probably see in a Universal monster flick.
The stories about the place were numerous. Tales of mistreatment, cruel experiments, and the restless spirits of former patients. But we brushed them off as mere urban legends, eager for the thrill of exploring the dilapidated structure. We chose a moonless night for our adventure, hoping the darkness would add to the thrill. Armed with flashlights and a couple of cameras, we made our way to the asylum. The air was thick with anticipation, and our excitement was palpable as we approached the rusted gates. Are you sure about this? Julia, the most cautious of our group, asked, her voice trembling slightly. Come on, it's just an old building, Jake replied, flashing her a reassuring smile. What's the worst that could happen? We pushed open the gates, with a creak that echoed in the still night air, and made our way up the overgrown path to the entrance. The front doors were barely hanging on their hinges, and we squeezed through the gap, our flashlights cutting through the darkness inside.
I would feel like your friends right now, getting kind of spooked going into an abandoned place that's got no electricity flowing through it still. But as long as you guys stick together, everything should be fine. Because if you break up into teams to explore the place more thoroughly, you'll definitely get lost or something bad might happen to you.
The interior was just as eerie as the exterior. The walls were covered in peeling paint and graffiti, and the air was musty with the scent of decay. Old furniture lay scattered, and broken glass crunched under our feet. We wandered through the hallways, our footsteps echoing eerily in the silence. This place gives me the creeps, Julia muttered, glancing nervously around. It's just your imagination, I said, though I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. We explored the first few rooms, finding nothing but old medical equipment and decaying furniture. But then we reached a large room that appeared to be some sort of common area. The walls were covered in old, faded photographs of patients and staff, their faces frozen in time. An old piano stood in one corner, its keys covered in dust. Check this out, Jake called from the far side of the room. He was standing in front of a large painting that depicted a serene landscape, completely out of place in the gloomy asylum.
Yeah, that would be kind of strange. Seeing a nice spring looking landscape picture inside of an abandoned place like what they're describing because it has all worn out looking photographs around it. Makes you wonder, did somebody just place it in there recently or it belonged to somebody that liked those type of paintings? I don't know. But that is a little weird.
Who would hang something like this here? I
Exactly.
wondered aloud, running my fingers over the cracked surface of the painting. As we stood there, examining the painting, we heard a soft, shuffling noise coming from the hallway. We turned, our flashlights illuminating the darkness, but saw nothing. Probably just a rat, Jake said, though his voice lacked confidence. We continued our exploration, moving deeper into the asylum. The shuffling noises persisted, growing louder and more frequent. It felt as if they were following us, keeping just out of sight. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could see the fear growing in my friend's eyes. We reached the staircase that led to the upper floors. The steps were narrow and covered in debris, but we decided to go up, hoping to find more interesting rooms to explore.
Okay.
As we climbed, the shuffling noise seemed to grow closer, echoing in the stairwell. Do you hear that? Julia whispered, her voice trembling. Yeah, it's probably just the wind, Jake replied, though we all knew he didn't believe it. We reached the second floor and found ourselves in a long hallway lined with patient rooms.
Yeah, I would believe the whole wind for making noise. I guarantee you're hearing a ghost shuffling around. You better be careful.
The doors were ajar, and we peeked inside each one, finding nothing but decaying beds and old medical equipment. But as we reached the end of the hallway, we saw a figure standing in the shadows. Who's there? I called out, my voice echoing in the silence. The figure didn't respond. It just stood there, watching us. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment I thought I saw the glint of eyes in the darkness. Let's get out of here, Julia said, her voice shaking. We turned to leave, but the figure stepped forward, revealing itself in the dim light. It was a man, dressed in old, tattered clothes, his face twisted in a grotesque grin. His eyes were empty, lifeless, and his skin was pale and decayed. Run, Jake shouted, and we bolted down the hallway.
There you go. That's a good idea. If I saw somebody with skin that looks decayed looking and the eyes are hollowed out, I'd be like, holy crap. That's somebody you do not want to run into. So that's a good idea. They decided to run before this thing chases them.
Our footsteps pounding on the wooden floor. We reached the staircase and practically flew down the steps, the man's shuffling footsteps following close behind. My heart was in my throat, and I could barely breathe as we raced through the asylum, desperately trying to find the exit. We burst through the front doors and into the night, the cold air hitting us like a slap in the face. We didn't stop running until we reached the gates, slamming them shut behind us. We collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath, our bodies trembling with fear. What was that? Julia asked, her eyes wide with terror. I don't know, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. But we need to get out of here. We ran back to our car, and as we drove away, I glanced back to the asylum. The figure was standing at the gates, watching us leave. His lifeless eyes seemed to follow us, even as we disappeared into the night. We never spoke about that night again. The experience had shaken us to our core, and the memory of the man in the asylum haunted my dreams for months. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had disturbed something that should have been left alone, something that had been waiting in the darkness for years. The old asylum still stands on the outskirts of town, a silent sentinel to the horrors that lie within. I haven't been back since that night, and I have no desire to return. The memory of that grotesque grin and those lifeless eyes is enough to keep me away. I've since learned to respect the unknown and to be cautious of the places that have been abandoned by time. Some stories are better left untold, and some places are better left undisturbed. The old asylum is one of those places, a dark reminder that the past can sometimes reach out from the shadows, seeking to claim the unwary and the curious. Even now, as I write this, I can feel the chill of that night, the oppressive darkness of the asylum, and the haunting presence of the man who should not have been there. The old asylum is a place of nightmares, and I can only hope that those restless spirits find peace someday.
Woo! That one is very spooky. But I do agree. If you go into a abandoned place, use stream caution because you never know. You might pop into a ghost of a former resident because they're acting like you're trespassing in the place that they once called home. But I'm glad they got out of there safe and sound.
I never believed in the supernatural. Ghosts, spirits, and haunted objects were the stuff of horror movies and campfire stories, not real life. But that all changed when I inherited an old, antique doll from my grandmother. A simple family heirloom, or so I thought. Little did I know it would lead to the most terrifying experience of my life. My grandmother had always been an avid collector of antiques. Her house was filled with all sorts of old furniture, trinkets, and decorations from bygone eras. When she passed away, she left me a beautiful crafted porcelain doll that had been sitting on a shelf in her living room for as long as I could remember. The doll was dressed in a delicate lace dress, its eyes a deep, unsettling blue that seemed to follow you wherever you went.
Okay, if someone in my family had a doll, I'll be like, I don't want to take this home with me because it looks creepy. And you see all the movies that have creepy haunted dolls in it, I'll be like, nope. If they got eyes like this, deep blue, that look like they're staring at you, I'll be like, I'm taking this to an antique store just to get rid of it.
I brought the doll home and placed it on a shelf in my living room, more as a tribute to my grandmother than anything else. It sat there, unmoving and silent, a reminder of the woman who had cherished it for so many years. At first, everything was normal, but then strange things began to happen. It started with small, almost imperceptible changes. I would come home from work and find the doll slightly repositioned, its head turned just a bit to the side, or its hands resting in a different pose. I chalked it up to my imagination, or perhaps the vibration from the nearby traffic causing it to shift. But as the day went by, the changes became more pronounced. One night, I was sitting on the couch watching TV when I heard a faint rustling sound coming from the shelf where the doll sat. I muted the TV and listened, but the sound had stopped. I shrugged it off and turned the volume back up, but a few minutes later, there it was again, soft, almost whisper like rustling. I got up and walked over to the shelf, but the doll was in the same position as always, its glassy blue eyes staring blankly ahead. Just your imagination, I told myself, trying to ignore the unease that was beginning to creep into my mind. The following night, I was awakened by a soft thud a few minutes coming from the living room. There it was again. I lay in bed, soft, my heart almost whisper-like rustling, straining to hear any other sounds. After a few moments of silence, I decided to investigate. I grabbed a flashlight from my nightstand and tiptoed down the hallway, the wooden floor creaking under my feet. As I entered the living room, I saw the doll lying face down to the floor. It had fallen from the shelf, or so I thought. I picked it up and placed it back on the shelf, arranging it carefully. But as I turned to go back to bed, I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. It felt as if someone was watching me. I turned around, and for a split second I could have sworn the doll's eyes had shifted, following my movements. Get a grip, I muttered to myself, trying to shake off the growing sense of dread. Over the next few days, the disturbances escalated. I would find the doll in different rooms, its eyes seemingly more expressive, almost as if they were alive. Objects around the house started moving on their own. Books would fall off shelves, lights would flicker, and doors would creak open and shut without any apparent cause.
I'll be freaking out at this point and narrow it back to the doll because if it was sitting perfectly on the shelf, how did it fall? Unless whatever's possessed it was trying to leap and walk away somewhere, but it fell. I mean, that's the only theory I could come up with, but I guarantee you it's got something to do with the lights flickering on and off.
The atmosphere in the house grew heavy and oppressive, and I found it increasingly difficult to sleep. One evening, I decided to have a few friends over, hoping that their presence would help dispel the eerie feeling that had taken over my home. We sat in the living room, chatting and laughing, trying to ignore the unsettling presence of the doll on the shelf. As the night went on, I shared my experiences with them, expecting them to laugh it off or dismiss it as my imagination. But as I spoke, their expressions turned serious. One of my friends, Sarah, mentioned that she had read about haunted dolls and suggested that we look into the doll's history. Intrigued and desperate for answers, we decided to do some research. We found out that the doll was over 100 years old and had belonged to a girl named Emily, who had died under mysterious circumstances. According to local legends, Emily's spirit was said to have attached itself to the doll, seeking vengeance for her untimely death. The more we read, the more the pieces seemed to fit. The disturbances, the feeling of being watched. The doll's lifelike that the doll was over 100 years old and had determined to rid myself of the cursed doll. I decided to take it to a local antique dealer who specialized in paranormal objects. I packed the doll carefully in a box and drove to the shop, my heart racing with a mix of fear and relief. The dealer, an elderly man with a kind face and a wealth of knowledge about the supernatural, listened to my story with a grave expression. "This doll is indeed haunted," he said, examining it closely. "The spirit attached to it is restless and seeks closure. We need to perform a cleansing ritual to release it." He explained the steps of the ritual, and we prepared everything we needed. As we began the ritual, the atmosphere in the shop grew tense. The air felt heavy, and a chill settled over the room. The dealer chanted in an ancient language, waving a bundle of sage around the doll. I watched in silence, my heart pounding in my chest. Suddenly, the doll's eyes seemed to glow with an eerie light, and a cold wind swept through the room. The dealer's chant grew louder, and I could feel the presence of the spirits intensifying. The doll trembled in his hands, and a high pitched wail filled the air, sending shivers down my spine. Then, just as sudden as it had begun, the wind stopped, and the room fell silence. The dealer lowered the doll, his face pale and sweat beading on his forehead. "It's done," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The spirit has been released." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The oppressive atmosphere that had plagued my home was gone, and the doll now seemed lifeless. Just a simple porcelain figure. I thanked the dealer profusely and left the shop, the doll safely packed away. When I returned home, I placed the doll back on the shelf, feeling a sense of closure. The disturbances stopped, and my home returned to its peaceful state. I never found out what truly happened to Emily or why her spirit had attached itself to the doll, but I knew that I would never look at antiques the same way again. The haunted doll had been a terrifying reminder that some objects carry more than just memories. They carry the lingering presence of the past, and sometimes the restless spirits of those who have been wronged. Even now, years later, I occasionally glance at the doll on the shelf and remember the nightmarish events that it had brought into my life. It serves as a chilling reminder of the thin veil between the world and the supernatural.
You know, every time I watch those ghost shows, I always look at antiques differently now too, because you never know if a spirit is still attached to it. But I'm glad he was able to find an antique dealer to help remove the spell of that little girl out of the doll and let her go rest in the afterlife. But that is one crazy story. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on those post notifications for more Midnight Nightmare content like this. This has been another successful installment of the Tin Man's Core channel. I'm your host, Jeffrey Tin Man Taylor, and that's a wrap. And have a nice day, y'all.